Matthew in Oakland, California. Hey, Matthew. Thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's up?
Hey, how's it going? How's it going, Thom?
Good. What's on your mind?
Well, okay, so this is what I wanted to talk to you about. I was actually just in a conversation about this right now. And I'm not going to be able to adjudicate this all in one quick call, but there's a great interview between Cenk from the Young Turks and Sam Harris on the issue of Islam, where the violence comes from, the relation between Christianity. And to make it just a quick point, there's this idea of the regressive left, people on the left, which I'm on the left, that are essentially saying, well, it's all the same. There's no big difference between violence in Islam, violence in Christianity. And I really would love for you to watch that 3-hour interview and see where you land on that, because there does seem to be an ability to draw a straight line from the life of Muhammad, the biography of Muhammad, to radical jihadists, whereas you can't draw that same line from the life of Jesus, from the teachings of Jesus. It's one's more of a perversion than the other.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I understand the history there, and I would suggest to you that if you were drawing a straight line from Jesus's teachings, by and large, to Eric Rudolph, that Eric Rudolph's behavior is completely inconsistent with turn the other cheek, love your enemy, all that kind of thing. On the other hand, Jesus also said, I've not come to bring peace, I've come to bring a sword, and that's the quote that people like Eric Rudolph are always quoting. So even Jesus said some things, if the New Testament is inaccurate.
Right. And Jesus also tacitly endorsed slavery. But my point here is that if you take it percentage-wise, now I'm a non-religious person, so it's my opinion that these are all vastly contradictory books and no way to live your life.
Matthew,
and man-made.
No, Matthew, the other piece of it is that the Old Testament is filled with calls to violence.
Right.
And the Old Testament is recognized by the Christian canon, both Protestant and Catholic, as part of Christianity, part and parcel.
We have to ask ourselves, that's the Jewish book. Why aren't Jews? It's the most brutal book. It's more brutal than the Quran, the Old Testament. But why aren't Jews en masse, some of the most secular people in our society, the Jewish people, taking to killing their neighbors for working on the Sabbath? Why aren't they doing that? And it's because of the fact that they have completely reformed their religion to a degree that even Christians can barely relate to. The point here is that the biography of Muhammad, the Hadith in general, and a vast majority of the Quran points towards jihad as holy war in a way that Christianity absolutely doesn't.
Well, but yes and no. I mean, talk to a Sufi, talk to a Shia. The idea of jihad is the idea of fighting your own inner demons. It's of achieving purity and oneness with God. It's the reality, Matthew, is and I get what you're saying, and I get that Islam has not, as an entire religion, gone through the equivalent of the Protestant Reformation that Christianity went through. It hasn't gone through the many changes that Judaism has gone through over the years, and frankly, the Bronze Age part of it is what the Saudis have been spending billions of dollars over decades to keep alive and to promote.
But are you familiar with Majid Nawaz?
No.
Please check him out. He wrote a book called Radical. He's a former jihadist, spent time in an Egyptian prison, and now is working to reform Islam in the UK.
So, and that's great. And if we're going to work to reform Islam, it seems to me that the first thing we should do is stop killing Muslims.
Well, yes, but again, this is something where it is absolutely true that the invasion of Iraq had a huge, horrible effect on radicalization, but it is not the sole cause. And again,
no, of course it's not.
1.6 billion Muslims?
Of course not.
1.6 billion Muslims. Half of 1% of that is in the millions of people. So even if 1/2 of 1% of Islam is getting radicalized to jihadism, it doesn't. 8 million.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, you had prior to the invasion of Iraq, you had Bin Laden with 20,000 people. It wasn't 1/2 of 1%. It was like 0.000001. It was a tiny fraction. And George W. Bush, with his response to 9/11, did exactly what Bin Laden wanted. He made him internationally famous, and he made him a hero among those folks who subscribe to this Wahhabist, perversion of Islam, I would say.
Right, but again, I just implore you. I know we don't have much more time, but I implore you to look up the concepts of the regressive left Majid Nawaz and Sam Harris and look at the I mean, this is like in the full spectrum of what I would love to get your opinion on, because I've been a long-time listener. I love you, but this is where I'm worried about people on my side of this issue saying it's all equal, it's all the same, roughly.
Matthew, after 9/11, I wrote a piece for an anthology called From the Ashes, and it had pieces by Billy Graham in it, and Jimmy Carter, and the Pope wrote a piece for it, the Dalai Lama wrote a piece for it. And the piece that I wrote was about the need for a modern-day reformation in Islam. Now, this was a month after 9/11. So, you know, it's not like that thought has never occurred to me. And in fact, you can find the book. I've got it up on my shelf here someplace. It's right there, From the Ashes.
I will look that up, and I appreciate that. It's just the last few people I've heard you talk to today on this issue, it worried me because it did make it sound like you were making these equivalences, and you were essentially saying...
No, I get it. And what I'm saying is that there has been a state actor in this. And I think that if Wahhabism had not been being promoted for over 200 years by the Saudi kingdom, and aggressively for the past 80 or 90 years, that probably Islam would be going through a major reformation, and arguably much of it has. I mean, you know,
are you familiar?
If you look at Iraq before the first Gulf War, before George Herbert Walker Bush destroyed the country, it was the Paris of the Middle East. It was, you know, women went to college, women drove cars, women had professional jobs, they were doctors, they were lawyers. They, you know, Saddam Hussein, he was a terrible guy, and he certainly didn't want to get sideways with his insane two sons. But the country was not being run as a, quote, Islamic state to the extent that it is now. And he was no friend of Saudi Arabia. I mean, this is why after bin Laden, after Osama bin Laden helped successfully with our help threw the Russians out of Afghanistan, you know what the second thing he did was?
What's that?
He went back to Saudi Arabia. He got about 5,000 of his buddies, his hardcore followers, with him, and they literally went to the Saudi-Iraqi border, and they were going to invade Iraq because he saw Saddam Hussein as the enemy of Islam, because Saddam Hussein allowed a reformed version of Islam in his country. He allowed Sunnis to practice Sunnism, Shia to practice Shiism, was not persecuting the various sects within Islam that are very, very peaceful, the Baha'i, the Sikhs. This was all heretical to Osama bin Laden. He was a fundamentalist Wahhabist, and that was when the Saudi royal family had him arrested, had him deported to Somalia, which is where his mother was born, and stripped him of his passport because he wanted to invade Iraq. I mean, this is a battle that has been going on for some time in the Muslim world. And the big mistake that we made is inserting ourselves in the middle of it. And then now the ongoing mistake that we make is conflating Islam itself with bin Laden and his buddies. Sure, they can point to it and say, well, this is the history of why I'm doing that. Just like today, you've got people like these alt-right guys who came to Washington, D.C. a month or two ago and did this press conference, where they were saying, yes, whites are genetically superior and all this kind of BS. And they were saying these are the ideals in which the United States was founded, which is true, by the way. I mean, the United States was founded on the concept of white supremacy and that God had ordained that this land was our land. It doesn't mean that that's what we still think, although, unfortunately, there are still some out there. Matthew, I got to move along.
You're
Thanks for the call.
listening to Thom Hartmann.